1 minute ago, the entire monarchy shifted. A moment so raw, so unexpected, it left Prince William in tears and the world breathless. Princess Anne, the unwavering titan of royal duty, stepped forward and did the unthinkable. She named Princess Catherine her official successor. No prior warning, no royal memo, just a historic declaration that turned private conviction into public power. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The chamber was supposed to be routine. A scheduled royal council convened to discuss the ceremonial structure for the coming quarter, but without any warning, Anne rose from her seat, and with the calm of someone who had rehearsed this moment in her mind 1,000 times, looked across the room and uttered the words that fractured the palace's very foundation. "Let it be known," she said, voice low but resolute, "that I name Catherine, Princess of Wales, as my official successor." The words echoed like thunder against the ancient walls of the council room. Gasps were immediate. Advisors shifted in their seats. Aides froze mid-sentence, and in the middle of it all, Prince William, who just minutes earlier had been briefing on diplomatic schedules, stood stunned. No royal statement, no prior whisper, no inner circle vote. Just Anne speaking with the full weight of the monarchy behind her, making the most seismic declaration since the Queen's own coronation. Insiders say it wasn't the statement itself that broke William, but the shock, the betrayal, the sheer publicness of it. His face fell in a way no protocol could have prepared for. His eyes locked on Catherine, whose own expression teetered between disbelief and dread. She hadn't known, that was clear. Her hands trembled slightly, her lips pressed into silence, but the weight of Anne's words hung in the air like a royal sword dropped without sheath. The term Anne used, "my chosen successor," was not symbolic. It was not poetic. It was legal, deliberate, and devastating in implication. Around the room, silence bled into tension. Beatrice averted her eyes. Edward's hand reached instinctively for a glass of water. Camilla, tight-lipped and visibly pale, whispered something to Charles, and Charles, he said, nothing. His silence was perhaps the loudest of all. For weeks there had been murmurs, quiet signs of disagreement between William and Anne, cancelled meetings. Anne withdrawing from joint appearances, an unspoken coldness. No one knew exactly what had caused it, but today Anne made it clear. She no longer trusted William with the future. And then there was the sealed document carried in by Anne herself. It had remained unopened throughout the meeting. Placed at her side, its presence was deliberate, a signal to those who understood royal codes. Was it a letter from the Queen, a secret addendum from Elizabeth's private archive? No one could say, but all eyes kept drifting back to it. It lay there like a sleeping storm, waiting. But to understand why Anne would defy royal tradition so drastically, we must go back to the days when trust was fractured behind palace doors. Before the public ever suspected, a secret pact was already in motion, signed in silence, guarded by grief. Queen Elizabeth and Princess Anne had long shared a vision for the monarchy's soul, and shockingly, Catherine, not Charles, not Camilla, was central to it. Hidden letters, late-night walks at Balmoral, and a velvet-lined envelope that now haunts Anne's every decision. It all leads back to the pact they made, and the one woman both queens trusted. It began subtly, like all powerful legacies do. While the world focused on Charles's ascent and Camilla's expanding public presence behind the curtains, a far different conversation was unfolding. Elizabeth, in the twilight of her reign, had grown reflective and sharp. She saw the shifting tides, the erosion of public faith, the cracks in traditional lineage. It wasn't about bloodlines anymore. It was about endurance, clarity, and quiet power. And to her, there was only one person who embodied all three. That woman wasn't born into the monarchy, but she moved within it with a grace that rivaled any royal before her. Catherine had become more than William's wife. She had become a symbol of controlled strength, the kind that Queen Elizabeth herself had wielded for over 7 decades. In private, Elizabeth spoke often to Anne about the future, not in hypotheticals, but in certainties. "It must be her," she once whispered in a moment of finality, her voice yet certain. Anne didn't question it. She felt it too. Over months, their conversations deepened. Catherine was being tested, groomed without being told. Every ceremonial role she was handed had hidden weight. Her speeches were vetted not for press impact, but for symbolism. The Queen was setting a tone, a quiet alignment of eyes and ears, watching how Catherine responded to pressure, to protocol, to silence, and Anne, ever the sentinel of the crown's integrity, began preparing herself not just to carry the Queen's legacy, but to one day pass it to the one Elizabeth had silently chosen. In a locked safe at Windsor, now referenced only in whispers, was a document marked Appendix Clarion. It was never released publicly, but references to it exist in internal palace memos, some marked confidential, others redacted. Those who have seen its cover say the Queen's insignia was embossed in gold, and that inside a clause was highlighted in red ink. For the continuance of sovereign dignity, an alternate vessel must be named. But what pushed Anne further was not just Catherine's suitability. It was Camilla's growing shadow. What had begun as subtle annoyance grew into sharp distrust. Camilla's influence over Charles was unquestioned. Her attempts to centralize ceremonial power, reassign traditional patronages, and quietly insert her own advisors into the Queen's vacated staff sent alarms ringing in Anne's mind. The monarchy was not meant to be curated by ambition, but preserved by restraint, and Camilla had none of it. That resentment became a fire. Anne's loyalty to her mother, coupled with her fear of Camilla's vision for the monarchy, made her decision inevitable. Catherine had no idea, and that was by design. Her humility was her armor. Elizabeth and Anne had agreed if Catherine knew too early, it might change her. The quiet strength had to remain uncalculated, so she was never told. She simply walked the path laid out for her, never knowing it led to a crown. But while these silent preparations took shape, Prince William was left in the dark, and his slow realization would ignite a storm. While the monarchy plotted its future behind veiled curtains, William was crumbling. Left out of key briefings, dismissed by Anne during family councils, and increasingly suspicious of whispers between Catherine and Charles, he began to feel not like a future king, but a pawn in someone else's game. And when the isolation became unbearable, William confronted the one person he thought would stand by him, only to discover she had already chosen another path. At first, the signs were subtle strategic briefings Anne once included him in were now rooted. Meetings he expected to chair were held in his absence. Charles's vague responses only deepened the mystery, as if something was unfolding beyond his reach. But it wasn't just exclusion, it was redirection. Power, he sensed, was shifting. His instincts screamed that something massive was underway. And then came the walks. Anne, known for her precision and brevity, was spending hours in private conversation with Catherine, often in the palace gardens or during what were officially called quiet advisory strolls. William asked once, then twice, what was being discussed. He received the same calm deflection. Ceremonial alignment, nothing more. But William knew better. They weren't aligning roles. They were rehearsing a future that didn't include him. The moment that shattered his composure came in the library. A diary half, covered beneath official papers, lay open to a page that should have never been left unattended. Anne's handwriting, unmistakable and firm, referred to Catherine as the bridge between legacy and longevity. Not a consort, not a support, a bridge. William's heart sank. He took the page, wordless, to Catherine. The confrontation that followed was not loud, but devastating. He asked if she had known, if this was something they had built behind his back. Her eyes fell, not in guilt, but in sorrow. She didn't deny it. She simply whispered, "I didn't ask for this, but I can't walk away from it." That single sentence carved a canyon between them that would not be easily closed. Charles, when pressed by William, offered nothing but riddles. "History will write itself, son," he said before retreating behind the wall of advisors he now rarely moved without. It wasn't the lack of answers that wounded William most. It was the lack of loyalty. The monarchy had always demanded sacrifice, but he never imagined the cost would be his own place in the lineage. His own wife, once his partner in rebuilding a modern crown, now stood at the center of a quiet succession he never authorized. In a rare moment of vulnerability, William sought Edward's counsel. "I'm not the one they want," he said flatly, staring at nothing. Edward, ever the neutral presence, said nothing, his silence confirming the painful truth. But perhaps the most chilling affirmation came from the least expected source. Camilla, who had grown more distant with every passing week, approached William briefly during a diplomatic reception. Her words were as cutting as they were final. "They've already picked her," she said with an almost cruel calm. "You're just watching it happen." But just when William thought he had time to regain control, Anne made her move and the monarchy's timeline accelerated overnight. Weeks before the declaration, something strange began. Catherine started appearing at functions not listed on the royal calendar. Anne's motorcade was often seen arriving at Kensington Palace after midnight, and behind closed chapel doors, mock ceremonies were practiced in silence. These weren't rehearsals for a queen, but something more calculated, more permanent, a transference of power in plain sight, rehearsed while the world slept. It started quietly. Aides whispered about odd scheduling gaps, events that were never publicized, but seemed to require full royal protocol. Catherine would disappear for hours at a time, flanked not by her usual protection team, but by figures closely associated with Anne's senior circle. Retired advisors were quietly recalled. Among them was Lord Bridgeman, a name that hadn't surfaced in years. He had once served Queen Elizabeth as one of her most trusted constitutional strategists, and his reappearance stationed discreetly at Catherine's side sparked questions that no one dared ask out loud. What was being plotted wasn't just symbolic influence. It was structural succession, not for the throne, but for the soul of the monarchy itself. What followed was even more unsettling. Staff from the Royal Chapel confirmed that several late-night sessions had been conducted under the code name Protocol Aurelius. The protocol, long thought obsolete, was designed during Elizabeth's reign as an emergency continuity structure meant to prepare a monarch-adjacent figure to assume full ceremonial command during crisis. But the timing was impossible to ignore. Anne and Catherine, dressed formally and surrounded by the Queen's old clerics, rehearsed moments that mirrored coronation rites, not for the crown, but for the scepter of moral authority. For the first time in modern royal history, it looked as though the palace was preparing a parallel sovereign, not by title, but by command. Even more incriminating was what surfaced next. A single piece of footage leaked by a junior staff member was quickly deleted, but not before it spread through encrypted press circles. In it, Catherine was seen bowing to Anne beneath the stained glass arch of the chapel, while Anne placed her hand on Catherine's shoulder and said words that lip readers interpreted as "it begins with you." The image alone sent ripples through the royal inner circle. Though unconfirmed, it raised a terrifying question. Had Anne already handed over power before the council declaration? In the lead-up to this, a document titled Succession Adjunct Proposal was spotted briefly on Anne's desk by a senior official. Though never released publicly, multiple sources confirmed its contents revolved around reassigning royal oversight, responsibilities typically reserved for the reigning monarch's spouse or designated regent. Catherine's name was allegedly listed in all three succession contingency roles. When William caught wind of the document, he approached a palace aide. His question was simple: "What are they planning?" The aide's response was colder than silence. "No comment, sir." Everything pointed to a singular truth. This was no spontaneous endorsement from Anne. It was a carefully executed handover, methodically planned and rehearsed beneath the radar of both the public and the heir apparent. The monarchy wasn't preparing to shift. It was already shifting, and yet no rehearsal, no protocol, no written decree could prepare anyone for the fury that would erupt when Anne spoke the words aloud. The declaration did not fall gently. Anne's voice, firm, deliberate, cut through the chamber like thunder. William, once the heir apparent, stood frozen. Camilla stormed out, and Charles remained silent. For a family built on protocol, Anne's words were sacrilege, but behind the outrage was something far deeper. Fear. Fear that the old order had finally crumbled, and a new monarchy had risen without permission. Anne didn't ask for permission. She didn't soften the blow. With the authority of legacy and the conviction of someone who had waited far too long, she spoke the words that shattered every assumption in the room. "Let it be known I named Catherine, Princess of Wales, my official successor." There was no stammer, no hesitation. It was not a suggestion. It was a command. The effect was immediate. The chamber froze. William's face turned pale as he reached for the edge of the table, steadying himself against the weight of the moment. Across the room, Camilla rose sharply, her chair scraping the floor. Her voice cut through the air, sharp, furious, and laced with disbelief. "This is madness," she hissed before storming out, her heels echoing like punctuation marks on a sentence no one dared speak. And then came William's collapse, not physical, but emotional. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words failed him. His eyes were glassy, the betrayal written across every muscle of his face. He tried again, forcing out, "Only you can't." Before Beatrice, in a move of urgent control, motioned for a recess, hoping to calm what was now turning into a full-blown royal rupture. But the damage was done. The structure of tradition had been pierced, and it was Anne who held the blade. In the chaos, Charles remained unmoved, his face unreadable. He neither endorsed nor denied the words spoken. It was this silence that frightened many more than Anne's outburst. If the king would not contest the succession, then was it already done? In the corner, Edward and Sophie exchanged a single glance. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't performative. Anne's declaration had not come from impulse. It had been a slow building storm that had finally broken loose. And now the storm had a name, Catherine. As aides scrambled to stabilize the meeting, a quiet directive was issued from Anne's chief of staff. "Protocol wins of the four," she said calmly, a command known only to a handful of senior advisors. Within seconds, internal communications shifted, security procedures realigned, and the palace hierarchy, at least in practice, was rewritten. For the first time in a generation, royal power had moved without coronation, without charter, without bloodline. It had moved by will, and not the king's, but Anne's. No papers were signed, no press release followed. But beyond the tears, beyond the titles, one woman remained curiously silent, and her silence would speak volumes. In a room set ablaze by power, Catherine did not accept, did not object. She remained utterly still. While chaos surged around her, she offered no words. For days afterward, she avoided press, family gatherings, even William. But those close to her say this was no fear. It was calculation. Catherine wasn't rejecting the crown. She was choosing the terms under which she would wear it. The silence wasn't accidental. It was strategic. While Anne's declaration dominated headlines and William's breakdown fed 1,000 speculative columns, Catherine vanished. Her schedule was cleared. All public appearances cancelled. Palace aides were instructed in plain language. No calls, no briefings, no visitors, not even family. It was as if the woman at the center of the storm had stepped out of time itself. But behind the silence, a quiet intensity was growing. Those closest to her began noticing signs that Catherine was not overwhelmed but preparing. She requested access to a specific section of the royal archive, one known to house Queen Victoria's private journals. No one could confirm exactly what was read, but aides noted that after one long evening spent with those aged, guarded texts, Catherine emerged, composed yet changed. Later, whispers began to circulate about a private meeting, one not listed on chapel registry. Just after midnight, the Archbishop of Canterbury arrived under heavy discretion. What was discussed inside those stone walls remains unknown, but witnesses say he left alone and visibly shaken. The very next morning, an unmarked envelope labeled Clarion Continuance was delivered directly into Anne's hands by Catherine's aide. It bore no signature, but the palace seal was unmistakable. Insiders believe it was a proposed redefinition of the role Anne had just bestowed, a structured outline of terms under which Catherine would step into power, not as a ceremonial puppet, but as a reformer in her own right. For the public, the silence became unbearable. Where was she? Why wouldn't she speak? Commentators speculated endlessly, some accusing her of cowardice, others praising her for restraint, but no one was prepared for the moment her voice returned. It happened quietly in a corridor meeting not meant to be recorded. Yet it was. When asked by a senior aide if she would formally accept Anne's succession, Catherine paused and said only 6 words. She wasn't chasing power. She was testing its worth. She wasn't resisting the monarchy's will. She was reimagining it. Anne, for her part, remained steadfast, a rare show of respect between two women bound not by title, but by vision. Still, the silence from Catherine had left wounds, particularly in one man who once believed they would shape the future together. Because, while Catherine wrestled with her destiny, William unraveled, and what he did next would shake the monarchy even further. Grief turned into fury. At precisely midnight, William summoned the Royal Privy Council. His voice trembled with resolve as he issued a chilling ultimatum. Reverse Anne's declaration, or risk permanent fracture within the family. What he didn't know was that Anne had already activated the Clarion Council, and their authority, buried in old royal codes, could not be undone by threats, not even from a prince. It was no longer about succession, it was about survival. William's midnight gathering was not sanctioned by the palace, nor supported by the monarch, but it was attended. Every senior figure within the inner circle arrived, faces drawn, tension heavy in the air. William stood alone at the head of the room, jaw tight, fists clenched. His opening lines silenced everyone. This family has not chosen. One woman has. The implication was dagger sharp. This wasn't a succession. It was a hijacking. He didn't speak like a man defending a title. He spoke like a son betrayed, a husband cornered, a future king watching his crown slip into someone else's grasp. His fury wasn't about losing power. It was about losing purpose. He argued that Anne's declaration was made unilaterally with no consent from the reigning monarch, no vote from the royal family, and no input from the Privy Council. And then came the ultimatum. Reverse it now, or fracture the house forever. There were no royal euphemisms in his delivery. It was raw. If this council upholds her word, William warned, then it no longer speaks for the future. It only echoes the past. Beatrice and Eugenie, positioned on the fence, stepped forward in hopes of calming the implosion. Both requested to be recorded as mediators, neither for nor against the decision, urging time for reflection. But Anne's private counsel, already embedded within the structure of the Clarion Council, blocked their motion to vote. That alone sent a jolt through the room. It became evident this wasn't a discussion. It was the aftermath of one. Then Anne arrived, calm, unshaken, and prepared. She said little, but what she brought was everything. A sealed envelope, aged but intact, bearing Queen Elizabeth's insignia. Within it, a single-page document naming the reactivation of the Clarion Council and affirming Anne's role as the final decision maker in ceremonial succession during times of sovereign incapacitation or instability. The document, signed and dated, could not be challenged without full Parliament intervention, and even then it would take months. By then, the new order would be irreversible. William's eyes didn't blink as the truth landed. With no more ground to stand on, he turned to Edward and said only 6 words, "Then I walk away from this." No one followed him out of the room. Within hours, security teams began executing quiet reassignments. William's diplomatic aides were given new posts. Travel permissions were updated. His communications staff were divided between Clarence House and Sandringham. The transition had begun not with ceremony but with consequence. But before the monarchy could splinter further, Anne revealed the final piece of the puzzle, and Catherine's fate was sealed. From a hidden compartment in Elizabeth's Balmoral desk came a sealed envelope marked with the late Queen's own insignia, entitled Succession, Private Eyes Only. It contained a message so personal, so devastating, it left even Anne in tears. In it, Elizabeth wrote not only of her choice, but of her fears. And as the words were read aloud, William bowed his head and wept. The chamber had been tense for days. Conversations had turned brittle. Loyalties stretched to their breaking point. But when Anne walked in that morning with the aged envelope in her hand, its wax seal unbroken, something in the room shifted. No one spoke, not even Charles. All eyes turned to the emblem etched into the paper, a symbol not seen since Elizabeth's final address. This was no ordinary correspondence. This was a queen's final will of conscience, not of state. Anne placed the envelope on the table and said only, "This was not meant for all, but today it must be." The silence that followed was suffocating. The letter, read aloud by Anne herself, was not long, but it was unforgettable. In Elizabeth's unmistakable hand, every stroke carved with care, were the words, "Catherine holds the heart of this nation. She is what I was before the crown, before duty hardened me. She must never lose that. She is not simply fit to serve. She was born to redeem." The weight of that sentence struck like thunder. No legal clause, no formal decree, just a grandmother sovereign to the end, leaving her judgment not in statutes, but in truth. The room inhaled and never exhaled, and William, who had fought so bitterly to understand why the crown's gaze had shifted, could only lower his head as tears ran freely. He reached for the signet ring passed down through 3 generations and quietly set it on the council table. It was not surrender, it was heartbreak. Then came the voice that had remained so frustratingly silent. Charles the monarch had said nothing through weeks of upheaval. He had watched Anne declare, Catherine retreat, William erupt. But now his voice was calm and stripped of formality. "Then let her lead," he said simply. It wasn't an endorsement. It was a release, a father's acceptance, a sovereign's final judgment. Anne, now visibly shaken, delivered the last words. "Then it is done." The air in the chamber felt almost sacred in that moment. There was no applause, no ceremonial gesture, just the unspoken understanding that the decision had moved from strategy to legacy. The monarchy had spoken not through politics, but through pain, memory, and vision. For the first time in a generation, unity settled over the table. The war behind closed doors had found its conclusion, not in coronation, but in clarity. Yet, even as peace settled over the chamber, the world outside had just begun to react, and one final ripple would redefine the crown forever. As dawn broke, headlines exploded. Catherine named successor by Princess Anne. William weeps at royal shift. Elizabeth's hidden decree revealed. But inside the palace, the mood was quieter, resolute. For while Catherine had not yet accepted a crown, the people had already bestowed one. And as crowds gathered outside Buckingham, one chant rose above all: "Let her reign begin." The outside world reacted with a force even the palace hadn't anticipated. Within hours, news outlets across continents scrambled to confirm the impossible. Commentators who once speculated about minor family squabbles now found themselves dissecting a seismic power transfer. And while the press gasped and debated, the public made up its mind. Polls taken before noon showed a staggering shift. Over 78% of Britons believed Catherine should now assume full ceremonial leadership. For the first time in decades, the monarchy felt untouchable, not by hierarchy, but by unity. Catherine wasn't viewed as a substitute. She was seen as the future. By midday, thousands had gathered outside Kensington Palace. Some brought flowers. Others carried flags, hand-drawn portraits, and signs bearing only one word: her. The gates had not seen such a crowd since Elizabeth's passing, but this felt different. There was no mourning. It was quiet jubilation, no speeches, no music, just presence. And at the height of it, as if moved by instinct, Catherine stepped out briefly. No royal wave, no grand announcement, just a nod measured, heartfelt, and electrifying. Inside, things were moving fast. Camilla had not been seen since the council's conclusion. Rumors swirled, some claiming she had retreated to a private estate, others suggesting she had refused all calls, even from Charles. What was clear, however, was her absence from every internal meeting following the Balmoral letters' unveiling. Whether strategic or emotional, her silence now mirrored the one Catherine had used to shift the narrative entirely in her favor. But if Camilla had stepped back, palace staff were stepping in. Anne quietly activated Operation Dawnlight, a transition framework only initiated once before during the early months of Elizabeth's unexpected accession. The message was clear. Preparations had begun, not for a coronation, but for something more subtle and perhaps more powerful, a coronation of spirit rather than ceremony. There would be no immediate press conferences, no televised address. Catherine had made it known through her advisors this new chapter would begin not with spectacle, but with substance. A new model of leadership was taking shape, one not inherited by right, but earned by resilience. The court had shifted. The people had spoken. The family, however shaken, had begun to realign. And so the story doesn't end. It only begins. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next